Welcome everybody to this Wi-Fi event with Sandra Shpilberg. WAFA, or Wharton Alumni Founders and Founders Association, is a nonprofit, and our mission is to accelerate the success of Penn Wharton female founders and funders. And so I'm going to go over a few of the logistics of this talk. So please add your question in the Q&A box. And at the end of the presentation that Sandra is going to give us, we are going to unmute you so that you can ask the question yourself. But we will post in Slack who is the person we're going to ask, what person is we're going to unmute. And then another thing is, in our chat box, we have the social media handles and upcoming events. So these are the social media events of WAFA and our upcoming events, and also links to how to follow Sandra. So I'm super thrilled to have Sandra here today. She is the founder and founder and CEO of Seeker Health. And she just told me that she's starting a new company. She is the author of New Startup Mindset, 10 Mindset Shifts to Build Up the Company of Your Dreams. And she also is a Wharton alum. Thank you so much, Sandra, for being with us. I'm super thrilled. I really loved your book. It's really nice to see that people, normal people can, you don't have to look like Zuckerberg in order to build a successful company that actually changes your life. So thank you so much for sharing your story in this great book. And I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. And I'm so delighted to be here. So let me take a moment and share my screen. There we go. Wonderful. All right, delighted to be here. I'm so glad that all of you can join today. What I want to do today is talk to you about my startup story. There might be some things in there that are useful for you as you either are building a company or want to build a company in the future. Then I want to share some startup myths that get in the way. And these come from the book. I wrote about a number of myths in the book. I selected a few to share today. And then 3, I want to talk about breaking free of the things that prevent you from owning your own future, from starting your own company, from running it in a way that is aligned with you, right? And doing it all on your own terms. So let's get started. So what's a startup? First of all, a startup is a human institution designed to deliver a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And so the words extreme uncertainty are highlighted, right? Because traditionally that's where startups work. We work in new markets, right? Bringing new products that don't exist before. However, nowadays with coronavirus, right? With the global situation that is going on, I would like to say we're all working as startups. We're all working under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And therefore, what I'm about to talk about is probably relevant whether or not you are at a traditional startup. So the formula, right? As I was building my company, Seeker Health, I noticed that there was sort of like a formula out there, right? And this wonderful show, Silicon Valley on HBO, sort of makes fun of it, right? And brings satire to the issue that generally startups are founded by men. They're Caucasian, Asian, or Indian. They're programmers, right? They're young. They're going to say yes to a co-founder. They're going to say definitely yes to a venture capital, to venture funding. And they're going to need a unicorn, right? A company with a valuation of $1 billion or more in order for all of this to be called a success, right? And so I personally didn't see myself in this formula. As a first-time founder, right, as I was going about setting up my company, trying to fill this need that I saw very clearly in the market, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about my company in a second, I didn't see myself in this formula. So if you don't see yourself in this formula, I want you to type up in the chat, I don't see myself in this formula. Just go ahead, take a second in the chat. I want you to say, I don't see myself in this formula. That's the first step in saying, you know what, if I don't see myself in this formula, maybe it wasn't written for me to begin with. And maybe I should find a different way to build a business, to start a business, to build it, and then eventually to exit it. So I didn't follow the startup formula. I did not take any outside funding to build my company, Seeker Health. And let me back up for a minute and just say, what was Seeker Health? Seeker Health was a patient finding platform, right? We found patients for clinical trials, for market research, for other efforts that a biopharmaceutical company may need. Generally, we found them for clinical trials. These were clinical trials in rare conditions, in severe conditions, conditions like cancer. And what our company was all about was bringing the education about clinical trials to social channels and then finding patients there that would be interested in beginning the pre-screening process. So as part of this, as part of creating Seeker Health, one of the things that I was able to do early on was create what I call a minimum viable service. And that minimum viable service was me, literally me in the beginning, placing Facebook and Google campaigns that were compliant to inform patients about clinical trials that were looking for them. That was the minimum viable service. That service turned out to bring enough revenue for me to fund, right, the development of the software that I had to build. So that was clearly the beginning. There was enough demand for that small piece, part A of my offering. And then very quickly, I found that I definitely had to build part B and part C, an entire end-to-end platform in order to really offer the full solution to this market need. But because of that, because I was able to bring to market a minimum viable service, and again, a lot of other founders would have said, no way I'm gonna bring a service to a company that's not scalable. But it was a tiny piece in the beginning that had service, and then it went into the software. Then I didn't have to take outside funding. I had customers that were paying me revenue, and these early paying customers not only pay revenue, they're actually really critical because they also give advice, and they generally become quite involved in the development of the product and pushing the product roadmap forward. So I didn't take outside funding. I didn't hire an expensive team. I have a whole chapter in the book called At First Hire Blank Slate. So instead of hiring these adults in the room that would require me to go get venture capital to pay their salaries, I hired pretty inexperienced people that were really committed to what we were doing and showed like a very good growth mindset and the ability to sort of keep going once aligned with the mission. But that who were early in their careers and therefore did not expect a very high, compensation. I used revenue to pay for the development of the product, and I ran a profitable company from year one. Oh my goodness, right? A startup that is profitable, right? Most companies in the startup world, they get venture funds, they spend all of that to build the product, then they get more funds, then they spend all of it. But to me, possibly because of my background, both personal as an immigrant and also professionally, having had accounting in my background, running a profitable company seemed the best and the safest thing to do. And I focused exclusively on acquiring customers and improving the ways in which we serve them. I didn't focus on TechCrunch writing about us. I didn't focus on, the general press writing about us. That would not have helped us. I focused on what mattered, which was to acquire customers and to serve them in the most complete way. So I didn't follow the startup formula, and I'm also not the formula. I'm an immigrant from Latin America, from Uruguay. I'm a woman. I'm not a programmer, right? My background is well, I started in accounting, then I moved on to biopharmaceuticals, right? And I worked there in drug development and in commercial operations and marketing. And then I moved on to start this company. I started my company at 39. I'm a wife, I'm the mother of 2 school-age kids, and I definitely need and enjoy 8 hours of sleep. So despite not following the formula and despite not being the formula, the number of customers for my company grew, revenue grew, profit grew, all of it still went up and to the right, right? And then in 2018, I received 3 offers to acquire my startup. I had started Secret Health in 2015, so this was 3 years into it. It was pretty early still, but the traction was very clear for our company. And when I received the first offer to acquire the company, I was a bit surprised by it. I didn't think that we were ready to be acquired. But then a second company came along, and then a third. And between the second and the third, I really took some time to go, sort of like deep inside myself and say, well, is this a good time to sell the company or not? And I decided that it actually was, and then negotiated with company number 3 to acquire the company. Then I stayed on with that company for about 1.5 years to help integrate this product into their larger offering. And now I am back out on my own. But I decided to write this book, New Startup Mindset, because obviously I realized that I hadn't done this thing, the build, the exit of the startup in the traditional ways, and that it was important to share it just to offer you another possibility. And I always like to say, look, if the formula that's out there for startups is working for you, then go with it, right? If raising venture funds is working for you, if sort of like building a team the way that it looks in that picture from HBO works for you, then you know what, do it. But if it doesn't, and it doesn't for many people, then here's a different way to do it. Now, you don't have to follow the formula, right? But there are myths that get in the way. And these myths are so pervasive in startup culture that the first thing that we need to do is see them for what they are. They're myths, they're not truths, they don't work every time. And so the first thing I want to do during this talk is begin to dispel some of these myths. I'm going to focus on just a few of them. There are more in the book. So the first myth is unicorn or nothing. So this is the myth that unless you build a unicorn, a company with a valuation of $1 billion or more, a Facebook, a Google, right, then you and your company are nothing. And nothing can be further from the truth, right? Especially as a first-time founder. So I think it's really important to break down the task of the build into something that is achievable and reasonable. And it's not this outlier result that is almost unreal, right? And so what I love to say is that right under unicorns, you have gazelles and lions and giraffes and all sorts of real, valuable, and well-fed animals. And so maybe this first time around, you don't necessarily even set to build a unicorn, right? You set to build a giraffe, and that's going to probably be great enough for you, right? And so the myth that I'm trying to dispel here is sort of, it's almost like aligned to this perfectionism that unless you get to the very end, to this very top outlier result, that all your effort was not worthwhile. And that is not true. And that stops a lot of people from starting because they're like, well, to build a unicorn, that's difficult. And so you don't have to build a unicorn. You can build a company that produces $10 million in revenue. You can build a company that produces $100 million in revenue. None of these are unicorns, but they're still incredibly valuable. They're probably making an impact if there are that many customers willing to pay for it. They're employing people, right? And hopefully you are, aligning with some goal of yours to move your future and your impact along. All right, so myth number 2, you are your startup, right? So oftentimes, if I say Tesla, you'll say Elon Musk. If I say Spanx, you say Sarah Blakely. But it's very important early on, especially for your first startup, to dispel this myth. You are not your startup. You're a person. You're a human being trying to live your life, trying to make a contribution, trying to find your purpose. And you're not your startup. And this is important because your startup might fail. A lot of startups fail, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you do. Your startup is subject to a lot of forces, right, that are not in your control. Market forces, global forces, right? All sorts of things that really we don't control. And so if early on we go into the startup saying, oh, whatever I build, I become that, then it becomes really difficult to agree to fail. A startup can fail, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you did. You move on. You might need to recover, lick your wounds for a bit, see what you learned from that experience, but then you're not your startup. The startup was a project that you worked on. Myth number 3, you need a co-founder. And so this is really popular, especially here in Silicon Valley. Venture capital firms in particular generally want you to have a co-founder, because then if I get hit by a bus, then there's another person. And usually also the co-founder might do a little bit of balancing of skills, right? I may be the non-technical, somebody might be the technical. However, there's a lot of research, and the majority of the research comes from our own school, the University of Pennsylvania, that talks about the impact of this co-founder relationship, right? This co-founder relationship is another very important relationship to manage. And therefore, companies that are founded by multiple teams tend to underperform companies that have a solo founder when looking at revenue and profit. And to me, that makes sense, because if you have a company that has 2 heads, right, it becomes more difficult to make decisions. And we also move more slowly, and startups sort of thrive on some speed, right? And so monster with 1 head is able to make these decisions in a better way. And the last myth is that you need venture capital. And so obviously when I say startup, probably the first word that comes up, for you is venture capital. I need to go raise funds, and lots of companies do go to raise funds. However, raising venture capital on its own is a very lengthy and demanding process, right? I think one of the things that really stood as a warning sign for me early on was that I had a close relationship with another founder, a male founder, white male technical founder. And this person had to have 70 meetings with venture capitalists to get to fund his company. And for me, I was thinking, well, you know what, I have this minimum viable service. I'd rather have 70 meetings with potential customers, because I actually think I can get like 35 to 45 of those to buy the service or the product, right? And so you don't always need venture capital. I really encourage most founders to go try to find these early paying customers. These early paying customers really have superpowers. They do a lot of things for you and for the company. 1, they validate the product and the company. 2, they provide revenue, which you then can use to build the company, develop software, whatever it might be the case. And then 3, even if you approach venture capitalists, once you approach them with early paying customers, then that also already begins to change your standing, right? If you come and you say, I already have revenue, I have 5 customers, 5 B2B customers, they're each paying me $150,000 to use the software, then that's a whole different conversation than if I'm coming without customers. So basically, instead of saying you need venture capital, I would love to translate this into you need paying customers, right? So let's get paying customers. Let's work on that first. And then if you still want to go raise funds, you can go for it. All right, so those were the myths. There are many more myths in the book. And the myths, they kind of show up because generally they show up as sort of like a little bit of like a fear, something that's sort of stopping you from going and creating. So if you have other myths, I'd love for you to take a moment in the chat and just put any other myth or limiting belief that you are aware of right now that you might want to share with the rest of the participants here on the call. I think it'd be nice to see what other myths are getting in the way, right? And so they usually manifest as like, well, I can't go start my company because I need a co-founder. I can't go start my company because I need venture capital. I can't go start a company because I am a woman. Like that's how kind of they manifest. So if you have any of those, write them in the chat. That would be really good. Let's get them out of you and put them out into the sort of like the bigger group so that we can see them. So the last part I want to talk to you about before we go into the Q&A is a few of the important aspects that I found as I was starting and building and then exiting my company to shift my mind, to shift out of that fear and to be comfortable doing this startup in a different way. So the first mindset shift I love to evoke in you is this concept of beginner's mindset. So beginner's mindset is basically this concept that says, look, you're going to be a beginner at this. Like there's really almost like no way around it. You're going to be a beginner at your startup. So let me give you an example. I had worked in biopharmaceutical companies for 15 years, right? I knew how to launch a product. I knew how to bring a drug from phase 2 to phase 3. I knew how to do all of these things. But yet when I went to start my startup, I didn't know how to do half of the things I had to do for my startup. I had never incorporated a company, never filed a patent, never developed software. You know, I never hired every single person on my team. So I was a beginner. I had started as an experienced person, you know, kind of mid-career, like, oh, I'm so experienced. And now I'm to be a beginner at my startup. But then as I was working through my beginning, I realized that beginner's mindset was actually an asset, that's actually what it takes to create, because a beginner tends to do a couple of things differently than this like very experienced person, right? So a beginner tends to be patient, tends to be humble. I'm a beginner, I'm you know, I don't know how to do this, tends to ask for help when he or she needs it. And then the most important thing that a beginner can do is it can quiet that part of us that criticizes us all the time. I call it the inner critic in the book. And so the inner critic, we all have that voice that says, you know what, you're not good enough, you can't do this, you're not going to be able to do it. And so the beginner's mindset, the beginner can basically talk to that voice and say, look, you know what, I'm just a beginner. So sort of like what you're talking to me about kind of doesn't make sense because I never got a chance to do it. So why don't I get a chance to do it? And then we talk again in 6 months, right? And so in the book, I actually talk about writing a letter to your inner critic, telling your inner critic to shut up for 6 months or 12 months so that you can go and create. And that's one of the beautiful things about being a beginner. So a few things here. So if you think that you need more experience before you start, try understanding that the most relevant experience will be to begin and then to continue. So I would have never learned how to file a patent if I didn't have to file a patent, right? And I would have never learned how to develop software if I didn't have to develop software. And so the things that you need to learn will be in front of you. And the only way to learn them is to actually jump in the pool, right? And do them. If you believe that failure is embarrassing, then try reframing failure as an opportunity to learn, get up and keep going. At the end of the day, the currency of startups is learning. We're learning a market. We're learning how to serve it best. We're learning how to lead this company in the best possible way. So there will be failure. It's not embarrassing. It's just kind of how this road is paved. If you desire to be honored for your past experience and accomplishments, you know, I have 15 years of experience in the biotech industry. Well, recognize that this past experience and accomplishments are part of the raw material that you're bringing to your startup. This is not lost. These experiences, these connections, they're part of that raw material. They're not all the raw materials that you will need, right? But they are part of that. And then finally, if you hear a voice that says you're not good enough, then first of all, you're not alone. I think all of us hear that voice that says you're not good enough, you can't do this. Then try talking to that voice and saying, you know what, I'm just getting started. I'm a beginner. Give me some time. Check back with me in a year, and then I can show you what I've been able to do. So that's the first mindset shift. The next one, and this is one of my favorite things that I discovered working on my startup, is what I like to call single deep focus. And single deep focus means that your startup depends on your attention like you depend on air. And so therefore your focus is really important for your startup. However, we are fighting against a lot of things to be focused, right? There's a distraction monster out there, and it's internal and external. There's external things, right? Like email and Wi-Fi and needy people and all these things that need to be turned off. And then there's internal things like our natural need to eat and go to the bathroom. And then our mental talk, our mental chatter that says a lot of things and produces this sort of like thought traffic that might not necessarily be productive. So what I like to do in these periods of single deep focus is, first of all, let me define a period of single deep focus. A period of single deep focus is generally about, you know, 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours, in which you will say, during this period of time, I will work on a specific activity that is really important for my startup, and I will work on it in a way that it is completely undistracted. I'm going to be completely devoted to this. And I would have controlled for all possible interruptions so that I can really create this closed container for me to create. That's what a period of single deep focus looks like. It is not the whole day, right? We're not able to focus like that in that devoted way the entire day. But if we are able to focus like that for an hour and a half, and in that hour and a half, create the product roadmap, right, for a software, or that in an hour and a half, create the pitch deck that's going to go to get early paying customers, or create the organizational chart that you want to be working towards hiring. So those are what I call the vital organs of your startup, and those vital organs are best created in these periods of single deep focus. So we have to tame this distraction monster. It might look different for some of us, and it is actually more difficult now during coronavirus when we don't have offices, right? And we have to sort of like find a way to keep ourselves away from our families sometimes. But it is incredibly important to find these periods of single deep focus. That's how a startup gets built, in these periods of single deep focus. The next mindset shift, and the last one for today that I want to cover, is regarding difficulties in your startup. So probably because of my upbringing, but as bad things were happening to me in my startup, and they were sort of happening at some points, like almost every 2 weeks, something like bad was happening in my startup. I would generally kind of get like off center and, sort of like get worried and ruminate and like, what did I do wrong? And all this stuff, like basically go into like a little bit of a spiral that then it was, by the time I got out of the spiral, then the next bad thing would be happening. And so I figured out that actually I was thinking about the whole thing wrong. And really what was happening is what I was encountering were just the normal difficulties of building a company. So if somebody would have told me before I started that, look, as you start your company and as you build it, pretty much every couple of weeks, maybe every day, certainly every month, you will encounter difficulties. And this is totally normal. This is how the road is paved. You walk through it, there's a hurdle, you walk through it, there's a closed door, you walk through it, there's a hurdle. I think I would have been a little bit more prepared. So this is what I want to do for you. I want to prepare you. As you go on your startup road, there will be difficulties. This is guaranteed. And this is the name of the game. And what I was able to do further during this time of reflecting is classify the difficulties into 2 buckets. One bucket are obstacles, and these are something that stands in the way, right? Something like a hurdle. They're generally medium to high ability to resolve this hurdle, and as you resolve this hurdle, you and your company will become stronger. So you want this obstacle because it's actually going to make you better. It's going to result in a new feature. It's going to result in a new something that is going to make you and your company better. Let me give you an example. Early on in the company, when I submitted our first marketing campaign for a clinical trial, for a Facebook campaign for a clinical trial, the approving body said, no, we need you to submit how you're going to control for all the possible user submitted pieces that can come in a Facebook campaign. And initially I was like, oh my God, this is an obstacle. They're saying no, but then I sat down and I wrote this white paper and I said, here's how we're going to control for all of them. And I put some screenshots and I said, we're going to turn off the comments on the page. We're going to do this, we're going to do that and that. And here I had my white paper called the social media control procedure. We resubmitted, the campaign got approved. All campaigns that were subsequent to that one got approved as well. That's an obstacle. I resolved it. And once it's resolved, it actually made our company better. It made our process better. So you want these obstacles. When you see them, you want to grab them and you want the opportunity to become better as a company. Then the other thing, the other type of difficulty is a closed door. And that's a little bit different. It's more like a structure that bars passage, right? And your ability to resolve it now seems kind of low, more like a brick wall, and you become weaker as you're trying to sort of put your head against this brick wall. The message that this closed door is generally bringing is to redirect your efforts. And so this happened to me also in my startup. I was kind of gaining confidence on the first product, the clinical trial enrollment platform. And then we went on in a different direction to try to build these rare patient communities. And I encountered a lot of closed doors. That market really didn't want this product. And they hurt. I mean, those closed doors kind of like they were difficult for me to deal with. But at the end of the day, the message was very clear: redirect. The water isn't flowing in this direction. The market isn't taking what I am providing in this direction, and it is time to redirect. So as you're building your startup, you're going to have difficulties, just expect them. And then maybe try to use something like this to discern whether or not there's something that you should really kind of get yourself up to solve, or whether really you need to redirect and go where the water is flowing. Great. So as I look back on my journey, one of the things that I feel like I was really able to overcome is fear. There was a lot of different types of fears that were sort of coming up. And I want to close with the thought that if you need to be afraid of anything, then the only thing I want you to be afraid of is the enormity of what is possible. Once you're able to sort of conquer yourself, conquer your mind, and sort of go and do what you want to do on your own terms, then these fears begin to kind of like move away. They don't completely disappear, but they begin to move away. And now you're really in a place where you're creating the company that you want to create, and you're doing it on your own terms. Perfect. And so with that, I think now we can move on to the questions and answers period. And personally, this is always my favorite part, because I love hearing your questions and you know, seeing sort of what's on your mind. So I'm gonna click out of this screen. Right before I do that, sandrashpilberg.com, my website, has information on the book. It also has a bunch of articles. And the next thing I'm working on are a couple of courses for founders or wannabe founders. So those will be coming up later in the month. All right, let me click out of that. So
thank you so much, Sandra. And I'm going to pass it over to Alice for the first question.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, Sandra. So before I go ahead ask question, I guess the format we want to do for Q&A is if we saw you have the name in there, we're actually gonna unmute you. So we would love to provide a way for the audience to speak directly to Sandra. If it's anonymous, I think either me or Carol, the moderator, we will basically repeat the question for Sandra to answer. So I'm gonna go ahead with the first one. It's from anonymous person. The question is how to think about competitors. The default is try to win, but I'm getting advice that I should build bridges. I'm not sure what to think about that advice.
Excellent question. I have a whole chapter on competitors in the book. Competitors are actually really important to your business. And what I say in the book, the first thing I would like for you to do with competitors is talk to them. So many times when we hear of competitors, the first instinct is to kind of like shy away or like learn just a little bit about them and then just, you know, like you say, win, right? Like defeat them in some possible way. But that's probably not the best approach. What worked for me is to talk to them, to actually find a way to learn more about what they're doing, because that will allow you to differentiate yourself. There is sometimes no reason why you both need to be playing exactly in the same target market. And that's really what became very evident for me at Secret Health. Once I started talking to my competitors, I realized everybody was doing clinical trial enrollment in common conditions, right? Like asthma and eczema and, you know, things that most of us may have or have. But my competitors were deeply afraid of going into rare diseases or going into cancer because those conditions were more difficult to recruit. And for me, it was the opposite. I was coming from rare diseases and I could offer more experience, more expertise, more value in the rare disease market, which also happened to be one of the market segments that was growing the fastest. So what I'm trying to say with this is you want to talk to your competitors, because as you talk to them, you might see that they're actually positioned for a different part of the market, which means that there is another piece of your market that is not being served. And that's probably where you could win, right? And serve them. That's one piece. And the second piece of the question is that, yes, definitely try to build bridges, because you don't know if these competitors may become the company that actually acquires you at the end, right? The three companies that I talked to, they weren't weren't direct competitors, but they were definitely adjacent companies. They were doing things right next to us, and they were missing this piece, right? And then they come, and what they actually want to do is acquire instead of build it. So being well networked in the ecosystem is very important. And then in the book, what I offer at the end of the day is sort of more of this, I guess, like mindset perspective, that generally most markets can support more than one provider, right? Just look around. Most markets have more than one provider. There's very few markets that are monopolies, which, you know, are technically illegal. But, you know, generally there is enough market share to go around where you could have a very thriving business, right? While not having even the leading market share, but while serving one specific target segment in a very complete way.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Erica Seidel. Sorry if I mispronounce your name.
Okay, great. Thanks. This has been great to listen to, Sandra, so thank you. My question, because I do executive search and have my own practice there, is how could you tell when interviewing people who had a growth mindset and who didn't? Was it a particular question that you asked over and over, or was it a particular thing that you were listening for that somebody else could kind of learn from?
Yeah, great question. So growth mindset is generally all about kind of this feeling that we're not fully cooked, right? Like we are here to learn. We're learning, we're improving ourselves. Failure is a tool to help us learn and succeed. And so generally what I would be looking for is I would ask questions relating to that. You know, tell me about a time when you thought you failed, and how did you react? What did you learn about it? You know, how would you feel if our company failed? Like I would tell them that, you know, how would you feel about that? And then when you do fail, what's your reaction to that failure? Like, I think these are all kind of sort of good questions. They're a little failure focused. So then I would maybe balance it out with the other side, which is, you know, how do you like to learn? You know, what are you here to do? How do you see this job fitting in your career? And that's a really good one, because the people that have the fixed mindset are really mostly going to be focused on the title. They're like, oh, I'm going to get a bigger title, and I'm going to have this opportunity to work at a startup and that sort of thing. But the people that have the growth mindset, they're really much more, you'll hear like, I want to learn, I want to grow, right? I want to experience new things. I want to see new situations and new opportunities, right? So that's kind of what I was able to pick up in these interviews to discern the growth mindset.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
All right, I'm gonna ask another question from another anonymous. The question is, what are your thoughts? The question is this method considered a small business with a lot of revenue versus VC-funded startups?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps a startup is a new business, right? That's why I defined it in the beginning, because I wanted us all to be on the same place. A startup is a company that is building a new product or service, right, under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So it doesn't need to be VC funded. It doesn't need to be in tech. It just needs to be bringing something new into a market that perhaps doesn't have it. So there's kind of like that innovation. There's definitely the innovation part to it. But the funding source, it doesn't define what a startup is or isn't. VC funded startups, right? VCs are going to be looking to create big businesses because they're in the business of making a return for their investors, and their investors need an outlier return. So I think that maybe that's the difference, but this isn't a method for a small business. It could be a small business, you know, maybe defined under, you know, revenue of 5 million or less, but it could also be a medium-sized business. It could also be a large business that operates in this way.
Thank you.
I'm going to unmute Ricardo. Sorry.
Okay. Hi, Sandra.
Mm-hmm.
How are you? You can hear me.
Yes.
So I wrote down my question, but I know you wrote the book and there's a lot of takeaways over there, but which is a positive experience that you're taking, like an aha action that you've learned from your startup that you're definitely going to take with you whenever you're going to do another startup? And which is another one, which is on the opposite end, a never do again moment that you're taking with you that you are going to make sure you don't repeat when you do it.
All right. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. So the aha moments, there's lots of them in the book, right? That's mostly where I wrote the book, to capture my aha moments. But let me see like which one is like sort of like my favorite aha moment. I think for me, it really related to how important it was to participate in the ecosystem and be a connector, right? So I think this is probably better said with, I came to Seeker Health with some connections, right? Some connections in the business, in biotech, and I definitely leveraged those connections to get my early customers. And then I leveraged those connections to get the next set of customers. And then I had to go and become the connector, right? Because I was sort of like, I had run through my connections. And so I think for a B2B business in particular, how important it is to be that connector, be sort of like a bit of like this center point, this node in the network where people are coming through you to ask for other people. And in that process, you know, you are giving favors, you are receiving favors. I think that that's what I'm taking into my next startup, that it is really important. And hopefully you're doing that from an authentic place where you actually really want to help people and want to connect with people, and you want to, you want to have that connection. But I think that's the aha moment of how important it is to have those connections and to nurture them. The thing that I never do again moment. I don't know, there are a few that come to mind. I think that we built Seeker Health really fast. And I think if I had to do it all over again, I would try to slow that down a little bit. I couldn't slow it down because it was my first startup, and sort of proving that the traction was there was really beneficial. And that's probably what invited the offers to acquire the company. But it was all done very, very fast, right? And I think right now, as I'm trying to do this again, I'm trying to slow it down a little bit more, both for sort of self-preservation purposes, but also because I think that there's some importance in going a little bit slower and making sure that what we're building is really, really tight as it's coming along, which is interesting because this advice is contradictory to, launch and kind of be embarrassed of what you launched. It's one of the advices that Reid Hoffman gives of just launch before you're ready, right? And I think that that's also correct. Launch before you're ready, but then grow and become a little bit more slow and detailed and meticulous as many, many customers are coming into the system.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Next, I'm going to let Laura to ask a related question to the previous one.
Hi, Sandra. Thank you so much for being here today. This is all great insights. My question to you today is more in the idea stage. And when you're in the initial phases of a startup, when do you know it's time to pivot, but without potentially giving up too quickly? And this question comes more from the perspective of, once you have an idea, you start reading and talking to customers, and, that might change your view of what the solution what you thought the solution was. So when do you know it's the right time to move on, or that you need to carry on?
Yes, great question. It's a tough one. I think that the data, the inputs that you want into that decision are primarily driven by your customers, right? Like, who are your customers? Have you shown them the solution, and what do they have to say? And what do they have to say in really honest ways, right? Because sometimes customers will kind of gloss over just to try to not insult you. But you kind of want to set up I guess like a container where you're telling the potential customer, you know what, I really want your honest feedback on this. Like if what we build has no use to you, or if what we build, is not really solving any need, then I want to know that. And I also want to know what you do need right now. Like what is a problem that we can maybe solve for you with this or with something else. So you're asking more about like time. When do you know is time? And I don't know that there's like a precise answer, but I think when you talk to a good number of customers, in B2B, I would say you talk to like 10 to 15 companies, right? And none of them want to buy what you currently have, then it's time to start making adjustments for sure. And I would use those talks to say what adjustments I need to make. Like what else do you need to see? What needs to come out of this, right? And kind of begin to turn those calls more into like product development to see if you can start to pivot. Sometimes it's a full pivot, like you have to go in a whole different direction, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just like, I need to see these 3 other things, right? That in functionality or in, service offering for me to buy this product from you. So in essence, I want the customer feedback to come to you, and I want, once you start hearing multiple customers saying exactly the same thing, then it's time to take that seriously and either build those features that they're asking or go in the direction that they're telling you to go to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to unmute Nancy.
Am I there?
Yes. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, how are you? Thank you again. This is, these calls are wonderful. Wafa, thank you. I just discovered you, not just Sandra, but the whole program fairly recently. I've been in corporate America, larger companies pretty much since my MBA at Wharton in the 70s. And upon retiring from that, I've become an entrepreneur. And one of the things we're kind of facing is, we're a consumer product. We do sell B2B, and then we have to drive the consumer to purchase from retail stores. It's nothing exotic that's solving anybody's problem other than a convenient beverage on the boat that you don't have to take glass, and it's COVID friendly, and it's actually healthy because it's not wine and sugar like all the other pouched beverages. So our dilemma is we're seeing great market acceptance, even though our first product was on the shelf in the middle of COVID. And we want to monitor our growth and national awareness, because our concern is really how you build a brand without your giants coming to say, hey, that's a great idea, we're just going to do it ourselves. And push us before our brand is sufficient enough and robust enough that they'll just come buy us out, which is our goal ultimately in our 5-year plan, is to sell out to a larger company. Our packaging is unique, but anybody can go get it with development. Our product can be created. We have trademark formulas. And so we're balancing, to me in my brain, how fast do I want to grow and how much free publicity, or do I want to be below the radar? How long do I want to be below the radar before I have the ability through finances and everything else to grow very rapidly?
Yeah, great question, Nancy. Really lots of nuances here. So let me see, this is what's coming up for me. So there's a bit of like this fear of like this large company reproducing the concept. I think it's a valid fear. However, just consider that large companies, they take a very long time to create new things, to move. That's why startups get created, because we do things fast and we can get them done. But then in a larger company, it may take a very long time to get a new product, and they usually have like a whole new product process, and it'll be probably like years, I think. But I think you should talk to some of the people in CPG and consumer packaged goods and just see, when you want to bring a new product to market, how fast can you do it as a big company, because they do have very established processes that they follow. Number one. Number two, the thing that came to mind was Honest Tea. There was like a good episode, I think, in How I Built This. They started that tea company, right? Again, not a very revolutionary product, but differentiated by the sugar content on the bottle. And they got acquired by Coca-Cola. So I would take a page of what they were doing because I think it'd be really applicable to your startup. I think at the end of the day, trying to run a profitable company would be really great here because that profit then becomes really attractive to the acquirer, right? That the acquisition then becomes accretive.
Hey, thank you.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure.
Cool. I'm gonna ask two questions. They're similar, both from Anonymous. First question is, what are your thoughts about quitting your job to focus on the startup? The second one, which is similar, the question is, at what moment did you decide to fully jump in Seeker Health and transition from your previous corporate job?
Mm-hmm, perfect. Yeah. Great. So maybe let me start with the story and then the moment I decided to jump and then focus on when to quit. So what happened with me was that I was at a biotech startup, and there is where I saw the need for this business, Seeker Health, and I wanted to buy it. I wanted to find a company that would do this for us, but I wasn't finding good companies, and I wasn't finding an end-to-end platform like what I wanted to buy. It turned out that my company, my biotech company, decided not to continue the development of the product, and I was actually out of a job. So I was getting, you know, a few months of severance to be out of a job and go find another job. And so for me, that moment became where, like, look, I'm getting a few months paid by my previous company who put all of us out of a job to go build this company. When else am I going to have these two things aligned? One, an idea for something that I see as a great need in our industry, and then two, a paycheck to pay for it for a couple of months, right, at the same time. And so I said, this is my moment, I'm gonna go do it, right? So that's how it happened for me. Now, in regards to quitting your job, I think that's always like a very personal decision, right? Because finances are really sort of what needs to be managed, right? I'm an immigrant, so I really don't enjoy periods in which I'm not making money. That's just kind of like, you know, something that's like very deep for me because my family did start from zero here, and I do remember being poor, and I don't want to be poor. And so, like for me, it's very important to have some income, and that opportunity that I had to take a couple of months of severance to then begin to build Seeker Health really, really helped me, because otherwise it would have been much more difficult for me to take the risk at that point. So I think you have to check in with yourself and say, you know, how much can I afford? I mean, generally for most startups, it will take like a good 6 months to prove traction, like to prove if there is something there. And so when you have, you know, the ability to live for 6 months without having income, then that's probably when you can quit your job. Does that make sense? I mean, the startup really benefits from your focus, but it doesn't necessarily all have to be in the maybe 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 time that you're working somewhere else. You can come home and then, you know, spend 8 at night till 11 working on your startup for a few days, you know, for as long as you can make that transition. So, I mean, I think it's a very personal thing. I mean, I also know other people who were maybe in a different financial situation that I was, or come from a different background, who would say, you know what, I can just go do it. I'll go do it for 6 months. I have enough savings. I have my family who will support me, you know, or I'll raise funds, or whatever it is, right? There are many, many different ways. So I think it's an incredibly personal question of how do you want to live during that time, right? And what's going to get you worried and maybe too impatient to quit before you have the answer as to whether or not the startup is a go.
Great answer. Thank you. I guess finance does play a pretty big part, or how comfortable you feel the finance portion can support. Right. Thank you.
I'm going to unmute Ron, sorry.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was wondering, Sandra, if you could tell me a little bit about your board and how you chose them, when you brought them in, what incentives you may have provided them early on, and if they were crucial or played any part in the exit transaction.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. I had a board of advisors. I did not have a board of directors. So in this board of advisors, I chose it very carefully. I had a physician who worked in rare diseases. She was bringing the perspective of sort of somebody who worked on the clinical trials and can tell us that this was, you know, a platform that would resonate. I had a lawyer, and this lawyer specialized on privacy and ethical considerations for patients. And that was really important because our platform was collecting patient information. I had a patient with a rare disease, like that was her job, that was her role, to be a patient with a rare disease. And then finally, I had an executive from the biopharmaceutical industry. I had those 4 people. I decided to compensate them all by the hour. So it was, I had a contract with them, and it basically said, you know, for every hour that you work on us or show up to a meeting, then I will pay you by the hour. I didn't give them equity back then. I started my company as an LLC, that company. Now my new company is a C Corp, but I did not give them equity. I only gave them a per hour. And they were helpful, I want to say. You know, they were, I relied on them as the company was moving forward and transition, instead of transforming into this full platform. I relied on them. We met, you know, I would say maybe once a quarter to update on what we were working on. And then the other thing that I did is with a few of them, I worked individually on something that was important. So for example, with the lawyer, he actually helped review kind of our entire platform from a privacy and ethics perspective. And then when GDPR came on board, the global data protection regulation, then again, we reached out. So I used them kind of like to create a very balanced group of experts that can give me some information and can kind of be like very quickly accessible. I think that was what the benefit was, that I could really access them really quickly through this relationship of being on our advisory board.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks very much.
All right. Maybe the last question, or we'll see. But it's from Anonymous again. The question is rather long, so I will read it out. My business disrupts established consumer behavior, which makes it hard to get customers because I have to teach the market. I actually launched last week and don't have any customers yet, despite getting a ton of positive feedback. Do you have any recommendations on how to, number one, establish credibility for customers to feel comfortable spending thousands on you? And number two, how to reach initial customers?
Great.
Good.
And I'm assuming that this is a B2B.
I have to run into one more. Can I get back to you in about an hour?
Oh, we're hearing some noise. Okay. I'm assuming that this is a business to business. Is it? B2C. Okay, B2C. Thank you, Anonymous. So this is B2C. I have most experience in B2B. So just want to caveat that answer. So established consumer behavior, you need to teach them what to do, and you launched, and then how to establish credibility for customers. So in the B2C world, I think that one of the things that is most important is social proof. So I think having some people that maybe use your product without maybe paying you too much in the beginning, so that you can produce some social proof that it works. And then they can become sort of like influencers that talk about your product. That could be a good idea there. How to reach initial customers in the B2C space is quite different than, you know, the B2B. You know, obviously in B2B, my connections were the first place that I went, and then I had to go broader. So when I had to go broader, things that I did explore were, you know, Facebook ads, Google ads, LinkedIn ads. I explored like light PR, light kind of focused PR. And so all of those for my B2B business were not the leading sources of new leads, but in a B2C business, it's going to be different. So I think, you know, basically what's in front of you is the setup of a marketing strategy, right? And so it begins with like, who is this customer? Where are they? What do they care about? And what's the messaging that you need to have for them? So I think that's kind of like the framework for the work that is ahead for you, is sort of thinking through that. Are they on Facebook? Are they on Instagram? Are they on TikTok, right? Where are these people that you need, and how do you intersect them? What's the right messaging to bring them in so that you can teach them this? And do they want to be taught that? Because I think that's the piece that's jumping out for me in what you're saying, that you have to teach them, you have to teach the market. And I would want you to go further into that. Do they want to be taught this? Because the only way they're going to want to be taught something is if you're filling like a deep need for them. So what's the need that you are solving for them? And is that going to be enough motivation to be taught something new? Those are my comments on that. Hope they help.
Thank you, Sandra. I'll
Yeah.
pass it over to Carol.
I don't think we have any more questions right now, and we are top of the hour, so I feel like this is a good time to end our conversation. Sandra, thank you so much for being with us and writing the book. The book is great, and it's really a good book for like all of us that do not look like the people in the movies or the people in the news all the time. And I think there are more of us than the news actually portrays, right? So big thank you for being with us. And in the top of the chat, you will be able to see how to follow Sandra. So she has her website and also an Instagram account. And our next event that's coming up is on July 23rd, which is an update from Wharton about their new venture lab. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending this event and sorry, everybody attending this event and asking all the great questions. Thank you so much, Sandra.
Thank you, my
Allison.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
See you next time.
Bye. Thank you.